so glad that you're here. And boy, do we have a show for you. You see that? That's Astead Herndon joining us. My former colleague. Were you a contributor then when I worked at CNN, or did you
I
just?
was a contributor back
Okay,
then.
it wasn't out of the goodness of your heart. So I'm glad that you are a contributor. So thank you. I remember, by the way, we'll get into it, but Astead, I remember you being, I think it was in Brooklyn in your apartment, and me being on the set. We spent a lot of evenings together
We
during COVID.
did.
We did.
During COVID, and you were one of the first people to put me on CNN, so I always really appreciate that.
Because I knew that you were a great reporter and you were really great. So thank you very much for saying that. And also, I reached out to you. Remember when I said, Astead, when you go home, you like for the holidays, you have the best reports with your family. So let's talk about this. Astead Herndon is a New York Times national political reporter and the host of the Run Up podcast. If you haven't listened to the Run Up podcast, then you haven't really listened to a podcast. It is really excellent. I'm not just blowing smoke up your ass. I think what you do is fantastic. So thank you for doing that. By the way, Astead, I could probably talk to you about everything we've discussed this week. We've discussed the CEO shooter. We've discussed Jay-Z. We've done some things that were, a little bit out of the box. I just discussed I call them DEI hires for the Trump folks, all these folks who are nominated. And it's not just because, they have these crazy past and all these allegations. They're just not qualified. So if you're looking at in sort of how Republicans define diversity, equity, and inclusion, they would be DEI hires. But let's talk about this. I want to discuss, I've been wanting to do an autopsy with you because you have been so outspoken about this. And I believe we have the same feeling on what happened. What happened, Astead? I want to hear from you, and then we'll go into it.
Well, I mean, I think we saw an election where the results could only be interpreted as a mass rejection of the administration, the status quo, the Democratic Party, particularly at the top of the ticket. And I think it shows a desire for change that was out there in the country that the party never spoke to. And to be honest, they didn't really try, in my opinion. Like they had kind of made this big bet really early, even dating back to early 2023, to shut down anyone who talked about a primary, to shut down people who talked about Biden's age and unpopularity. Things like they ignored issues like inflation and immigration. They tried to convince Americans out of their concerns rather than actually speak to those concerns directly. And I don't think that they even got to the point of really understanding what this race was about until the candidate switch, where I think Harris was kind of initially the first effort they even had to kind of speak more directly to people's concerns and understand the desire for change in the air. And so they were working from such a place from such a far off place from where most of the country was in terms of wanting something different than the status quo. I think they made this election really hard on themselves. And so there's been debates about whether it was a candidate problem, a message problem, but I'll really kind of posit it was a process problem. Every step of the way, they shut out hearing from their own voters to kind of do what the kind of political establishment wanted to do in this race. And there was a lot of evidence that was a bad idea.
I want you to hang on to that, not just shutting out some of their own voters, but shutting out some of the folks who you would think that they should have or would have relied upon for the reporting of this, for the covering of the campaign. But let's go on to talk about that. Shut out their voters because a lot of folks they were supportive of the current president, right, when he was in the race, had concerns about his age. I don't know if you remember, and I know you do remember because I think we discussed it. I had Karine Jean-Pierre on my show on CNN back in 2022, and I asked her about Biden's age. And I said, and he's whatever. I don't think I ever recovered as someone that they liked or wanted to do an interview.
That was a question they could not ask. It was a question they would hold against people who asked it for the entirety of the administration.
So it wasn't just me.
Oh, it was certainly me too. It was other people too. I think I had experiences with them that were kind of ridiculous. I would tell them, I would go to the Biden administration and say, hey, we're doing this podcast about the election. I would love to get some ideas going that we could work alongside you all, kind of normal journalistic stuff. And it was easy. I remember asking them, hey, can you give me a place that's better off than it was 4 years ago? And we will go and dedicate an episode to it. I don't think that that's some gotcha request. That's a pretty straightforward thing for kind of journalistic campaign. And they would not play ball because what we were doing that was unacceptable was we were also hearing from voters on the issues they did not want to talk about: Gaza, inflation, immigration, and his age. And
Mhm.
if you can't acknowledge those realities, then that means you're not really speaking to those concerns that voters have either. And so there was an attempt from the administration to block out evidence that really conflicted with what they wanted to hear. And I just don't know how you plan on winning while doing that.
I said, are you beating up on the guys? Do you feel like it?
I mean, I don't think so. I mean, I would say, like, do they believe that this election, do they believe the stakes of this election that they laid out for the last 3 years, right? Because if so, and democracy was on the line, then I don't think anyone's beating up on them.
Well, unfairly, people will say, why are you going back after, the whole thing and beating up? It wasn't Kamala Harris's fault, blah, 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 blah.
I actually don't think I'm really saying it's Kamala Harris's
You're
fault.
not.
I actually think that she was a reflection of a broken party at the top of that, and they did not set her up for success. I've been one of the people who have called out even the administration's treatment of Kamala Harris as vice president. And I think the original sin here was Biden and the people around him just refusing to wrestle with the fact that a lot of Americans did not see him as a two-term president. And so whether they were selecting Kamala Harris in that initial role or the first couple years where she was given assignments like immigration and talked about poorly in the press by a lot of Democrats, none of that was helpful in terms of the eventual succession of Joe Biden. And I was calling that out at the time. I mean, it seems to me that they could have either picked someone who they wanted to set up for success, or they could have supported the person they did choose. What they did, in my opinion, was the worst of both options, where they chose someone, demeaned them along the way, and then only needed them when it came to a crisis. I think that to me is the when we talk about racism and sexism's impact on this race. It's not just voters' view of Kamala Harris, which certainly was impacted by her identity. It's Democrats' own treatment of her as VP. And I've been one of the people calling that out from the start.
She overperformed, actually, if you really think about the position that she was put in. Don't you think at least, she outdid expectations? Am I
The only
wrong?
reason Democrats can have a Senate or kept some of the congressional is because the bottom did not fall out. And when Joe Biden was the nominee, every sign pointed to the bottom falling out in this election. And so there's a lot of evidence to say that she did the party a loyal service by even stabilizing what was a campaign in free fall.
Yeah. I was at the Robert F. Kennedy Ripple of Hope Human Rights Awards last night, and I just had folks, person after person, coming up to me wanting sort of an autopsy on the election,
Mhm.
and asking me what I thought happened. And I had been saying this. I know it's going to be people are going to think it's tough. I felt, Astead, I felt like the folks who were running her campaign, that they ran her campaign as if she was a white woman trying to appeal to black people when she was a black woman who had black experiences, and her campaign should have been run as such.
Yeah.
You think I'm off with that?
No, I don't think you're off. I think the biggest evidence is after the switch, the campaign never retailored its new candidate, right? They essentially ran the
Why did that
Biden.
happen? Is it because they had the same people like running the campaign? I actually called. I'm going to be completely
Mhm.
transparent with you. I called Bakari and I said, Bakari, who's running her campaign? Is it all like white people who ran, either Hillary Clinton's campaign or whatever? And he goes, well, not really, but kind of.
Yeah, I think
So
that's pretty true. Like it's not the same exact people, but it's a similar group. And more importantly, Biden's campaign operation was a very tight circle that was very top down. So really only, the names that, Jen O'Malley Dillon, Mike Donlin, like though Ron Klain, like those type of people. He has a very small group of people who make a lot of decisions. And so I think what you're feeling though is a candidate in Kamala Harris that was having a campaign run that was not authentic or tailored to her.
right.
And I think that has been a struggle for her in DC broadly. She's mostly had staffers and people around her that were Clinton people, that were Al Gore people, that were, even Obama people. But there has not necessarily been a track record of a Harris person. And that partly that's because, she's had the staff turnover. Some of that people were her family and sisters, and that works a little differently. But I'm saying the impact has been, and I remember someone in the White House telling me this when I was working on my profile of Harris last year. They said that one of the difficult parts of her changing team around her was they felt that they could not trust someone to speak on her behalf. They couldn't trust someone to kind of share the vision, and that you could really only know that she liked it or not if she was saying it herself. That's not a great place for a politician to be, because a lot of that makes it much harder for you to run, I think, a more authentic campaign that delegates and is reflective of you. And so I think you're picking up on an important piece.
But isn't it at the end of the day, again, I don't want to beat up on her because I do think that she did a good job. But at the end of the day, should she have just said, look, this is my campaign. I'm going to run it the way that I want to run it. And because I have such a short runway, I'm just going to
Yeah.
go pedal to the metal. And
Yeah, this is why I think it's important that, like I covered her original presidential race. And there's a lot of reasons you can talk about decisions made here or there. But I think at the core of this is a candidate who has not made a campaign work from the premise of their vision, has not laid out a vision of what they want America to be, who hasn't really articulated what a Kamala Harris Democratic Party is in relationship to a Joe Biden Democratic Party or anybody else. And so, yeah, we can talk about all these other decisions. But at some point, if this was a candidate that says, hey, there are these things I won't budge on, and these is what this candidacy is about, or hey, this is how I'm going to tell the story of how I changed from 5, 6 years ago to now. Those are all decisions that she could have made. And
yeah,
so I don't think that I don't think that she's some horrible politician who couldn't have won. But I also don't think she has made a lot of choices, and most importantly, not wanted to articulate a vision on any step of the way. And honestly, as someone who has asked her about this, she has resented those questions. She has not taken the opportunities to lay that out. And I think that plays a big role in this election. The biggest thing you hear from people is they didn't like Joe Biden or the current administration, and they had no idea how she was different than that, right?
well,
That was on her to lay that difference out.
and look, then here's the view. Let's play it.
If anything, would you have done something differently than President Biden during the past 4 years?
There is not a thing that comes to mind in terms of, and I've been a part of most of the decisions that have had impact.
Okay, so I watched that live, and I knew right then.
Like,
I was like, ah.
it's a fundamental misunderstanding of the problems of this race. People did not want you to be Joe Biden. They didn't want you to be loyal.
But also, I don't know why there was not a better answer, and also I don't know why someone didn't say. And perhaps it's because of the people around her. We have to have a sit down with Joe Biden, and we respect him for
Yeah,
what he's done. But we're gonna have to separate ourselves.
for sure.
And
And so they,
it's not personal. But she couldn't bring herself, or they couldn't bring themselves to do that. Am I wrong?
whoever it was, but it was a bad call, right? It could have been a candidate. It could be because you heard the staffers say when they went on Pod Save America that like some of this is a candidate who felt really close to Biden and didn't want to do those breaks. And so whether it's Harris individually or the folks around her, it was a poor call. But I would also say it's a party problem. The big reason why they didn't, the big impact of them not having a primary, even if Kamala Harris would have won the primary, is that it would allow this campaign to be run more on her terms. I think by the time the candidate switch happens, she is in a difficult position because she's been defending Joe Biden and acting like he was going to be the next president for the last 2.5 years. That
Mhm.
was a big problem. And so she could definitely have done something differently in the last 3 months. But I'm saying the macro issue is that they only had 3 months.
Yeah.
And what they should have done was recognize from the start of this race that every piece of public evidence said Joe Biden was massively unpopular, and the majority of Democrats didn't want him to run for it, didn't want to run for a second term. There was ample evidence of that. They ignored it.
Yeah, she could have separated herself. Look, I don't know if did you see any of the stuff that I was doing around the country in battleground states? And
Hmm.
if you saw those, it gave you an indication as to which way the election was
For
probably going
sure.
to go. I reached out to them and said, "Look, you guys have an issue as it relates to these couple of things." And I know I've been doing this for a long time. I'm not a Washington person,
Hmm.
but I'm someone who has my ear to the ground. Never heard from them. Is that?
Yeah.
And then it's come to find out I'm not the only person with that having that experience with them.
Yeah, I don't. From what I hear from people who are good, who were working in good faith, people who wanted Democrats and Kamala Harris to win, who were trying to show warning signs or tell them that they had real issues. I don't. It doesn't feel as if there was a real sense of openness to that. But I don't think that like we don't even have to, it doesn't even have to be a mystery. Like when inflation was at its peak, their response was not to say, "Hey, we know you are hurting Americans." Their response was to say, Bidenomics is good. And if you look at these other job numbers, you will see that the economy is actually good. Like, that was a that's a crazy decision to try to tell people, no, you're actually wrong about how you feel. And here's actually the right way to feel. And so I'm saying that's the lecturing tone at the core of this. Immigration's a great example. For all of Donald Trump's consistent lying, misrepresentations of positions, flip flopping, all of that stuff, he's been fairly consistent on immigration. And the country's a lot closer to where he is on immigration right now than they were 4 years ago or 8 years before that. And I would say even more than that, Democrats never presented a counter vision of immigration system and how it should work. It was only 4 years ago they were only saying that Donald Trump was racist, right? And so I remember when we were starting our work on the run up in the summer of 2022, and people's feelings about politics and the country in general were so in the gutter, so much malaise, so much like feeling that politics was broken and things needed to be disrupted. And that was because there was a legitimate inflation crisis, a legitimate immigration crisis.
Mhm.
And I think things like the Dobbs decision and others had kind of made people feel pretty badly about the political system as it was, right?
Yeah.
Not necessarily Joe Biden's fault, but saying that they just not like voting for Democrat in the last 2020 election saved their abortion rights, right? And so I'm saying that that feeling that people had that was really a distaste of the administration and status quo, they never recognized, even though it was the biggest sentiment we heard across the country and on the ground for the last 2, 3 years.
Let me ask you. I have a couple questions. I want to go fast because I know that you are a very busy man. Why did they sort of nicheize and fetishize Black media when it should have been like, it should have been her home? I felt like, why did they do that?
Yeah, I really don't know a clear answer to that. I could just say that like they were, again, like I always go back to Biden. They were working from a media shortcoming in the Biden years because he couldn't do interviews, right? So it had
Mhm.
developed this oppositional relationship with traditional media because media was correctly calling out how the president hasn't done these interviews, how he hasn't done sit downs, blah, blah, blah. And so they had dug into this position even before the candidate switch even happened, that media was against them and that they were a tool of their demise rather than the opportunity to get their message out. So I think by the time it actually came to the point where they needed to be out there, they had already dug into this anti-traditional media space. And so they were only basically dealing with this podcast ecosystem, which is not particularly friendly to them, right? Like it's much more friendly to Donald Trump. And I think, niche media, black, going on black radio or going to doing individual Spanish speaking radio or things like that. But I think to me, the most
They made it a
important thing,
thing. I didn't like it. Should have been, they made it like, okay, now we're going to do Black media.
yeah,
We're
yeah.
gonna do this Black. It's like, why? She's a Black woman, just like,
But again, they were doing this more broadly. Think about how long it took her to do that sit down with Dana Bash after getting the nomination after the switch,
yeah.
and how much buildup there was to that. There was no reason to make every individual interview feel like the Super Bowl. She could have been out there every day. She could have been out there all the time, and that would have lowered the individual pressure of each one. They didn't want to do that.
Why are organizers, especially Black organizers, complaining about not getting paid and
Yeah.
not and being ignored even Black ministers? The campaign. There's a report. I don't know if you saw it. And it's called the Magazine of Politics and Culture, currentaffairs.org. It says how much of the Harris campaign, this is their headline, was a scam. The campaign squandered a whole lot of money and made plenty of people rich. Parts of the Democratic operation seem more like a multi-level marketing scheme, MLM, than a political movement. I don't know if you saw this, but it is by Nathan Robinson. So,
I mean, I haven't seen that one specifically. There was a recent report in the New York Times about the kind of Black staffers who were upset with the Harris campaign and the outside Black political consultants who felt like the campaign not only did not listen to them throughout the process, but they didn't really even invest in those voices. And I guess I would say, like, political campaigns can often be a scam, a cash grab for consultants and things like that. But one of the things the Harris campaign, I think, kind of prided itself on, was kind of revisioning like kind of who matters in these type of rooms and calling themselves ones who really cared about representation and diversity and things like that. But I think the story that's becoming really clear since is that a lot of people feel like more tokenized than listened to. And I think that that speaks to something we saw during even the administration. I mean, remember, this was the most diverse administration or diverse campaign of all time. But remember, but every time there was a big decision, think Biden's chance to drop out, it shrunk down to this core group of white longtime advisors and his family. Like it always collapsed back into this kind of core group of people, and that was overwhelmingly white and traditional and folks who had been in Washington for a long time. And so I guess I say like all that to say, yeah, I haven't read the specifics of the allegations of people not getting paid, but there are certainly people saying that they haven't been hurt and they did not invest in Black and Latino political groups on the route there. And I think that like checks out with some of the things we were hearing from Philadelphia on election day, of people not feeling like there had been get out the vote efforts and organizing and things like that. It was a big difference from 4 years ago. Like there was very much the Stacey Abrams view of how to win races 4 years ago, where you knock on doors and create this multiracial coalition. They had kind of stopped that. They were more playing for the Liz Cheney crowd, more playing for people who they knew were going to vote. And so organizing or changing the electorate became less of an incentive. That just kind of fell on their face. But I think it wasn't an accident.
It wasn't for them to campaign with Liz Cheney. But I mean, I like what she did, but you know what I'm saying.
They thought those people were definitely going to vote. So they thought about the electorate as it was and said, hey, if we can persuade a certain level of moderate Republicans and then Democrats come and vote for us, we will win. And all I'm saying is they underestimated, one, Trump's ability to expand the electorate and get people who don't vote to come out to vote. Donald Trump is a unique political figure in his ability to do that.
Well, I was out there talking to those college dudes that he animated a part of the electorate that they
for
didn't
sure
think about.
I'm saying those type of people weren't voting, and so Donald Trump changes that. He also won the persuasion game too. Those same Liz Cheney voters who were supposed to be those moderate centrists, those overwhelmingly broke for Trump. And so what it ends up looking like is that the Harris campaign, in doing the kind of, Cheney messaging, was only talking to the type of people who had already become Democrats in the Trump era. And so their calculation of what the electorate looked like just didn't work out.
You mentioned the Harris campaign folks going and doing their postmortem on Pod Save America. You went on. Why are you fighting with John Favreau? What did you?
I'm not really trying to fight with anybody. I mean, we had gone back and forth a little bit. I think it's somewhat of
Let's see the full screen as you that.
It's somewhat of a rivaling pods thing. But I had said after the interview just that I think that this shows the importance of actual journalistic media, because there was a lot of questions in there to those folks that they should have asked. They never asked them about Gaza. They never asked them about things like whether they regretted having Biden stay in the race, right? The core questions of this race were never asked. And so I actually don't think that that's a big surprise for them, because they're not journalists. They're friends, They're like, and so all I'm saying is, I was saying this is too much of a public service importance for no journalist to be in the room. He took it as an opportunity to act like I was trying to get personal credit for Biden's age. And I just think that for me, it reminds me of the kind of tone that Democrats have come to these questions with for the last 4 years.
I love you.
I really do. I just think it's the same unwillingness to listen is the same thing.
It's inside the beltway kind of thing, and
for sure. We're all friends at the end of the day. Everyone keys. We're all good. And I'm like, that's all well and good, but you can't tell people democracy's on the line because the other guy is kind of like a fascist and then say we're all cool at the end of the day. I'm like, some people they're flunking the smell test of authenticity and they don't know it. They're losing their brand as the morally righteous and they don't get it.
Yeah. What do you think of this? This is a cover of Time Magazine. And it is the person of the year. And I wonder what you think of this.
I mean, he's was the person of the year in 2016. It's usually been the person who wins the presidency. And to be honest, I think Donald Trump has changed scope of American politics and life. And so
course.
it's not crazy to me that he's the person of the year. What I think it also shows, though, is like, I don't think there's going to be the same media resistance as there was in 2017.
Yep.
Like, I think a lot of people are
God.
happy to welcome him back and will be happy to ingratiate themselves with the administration.
Are
And
you
so, like,
worried then that that corporate media, that journalists
mhm.
will pull their punches because their bosses may say, "Hey, look, don't screw it up. We don't need a mouthy journalist like screwing up our mergers and acquisitions and blah
That should
blah."
certainly be a concern. I think that that's a concern across the board. But I would also say, like, I don't think, like, yes, I think it's going to be more so with Trump, but I don't think people didn't pull their punches for the sake of Biden. I think a whole bunch of people in media did not have held their punches back on Democrats over the last 4 years because the Biden campaign was doing things like cutting people out who asked those questions. So I guess I'm saying, like, I do think that's a worry for me, particularly in Trump era, because of his explicit promises about press freedom and retribution and all those things. I'm not trying to act like they're the same, but I'm saying for a lot of those, to me, the problem is a type of political journalism that is reliant on access and power and ass kissing to power. And
Yeah.
so for the people who engage in that form of political journalism, they were doing that under Biden and they're going to do that under Trump. That's what they do.
Okay, I promise you, this is the last question. So this whole thing that's happened with the CEO healthcare shooter.
For sure. Obviously, yeah.
There are folks out there who are saying, why aren't Democrats taking the part of this issue about healthcare insurance, the issues that people have with it? Not that they would condone this murder, right?
Mhm.
But why aren't they taking that message and making it and helping out with that? And that's my last question. I'll let you go.
Yeah, I mean, I think that one, it's important to notice, like, how little they talked about healthcare throughout this campaign. Like, there was in 2020 competing visions on how to make the America's healthcare system more equitable, and that really has kind of fallen away now. And so I do think that if there's something that the reaction to the shooting reminds me, it's that for a lot of people, aspects of politics that are sometimes accepted by the establishment and political class are still people see as ridiculous. So things like healthcare inequities, things like education and homelessness, gun violence. These are things that I hear about all the time from people, but are very rarely talked about by candidates. And
Yeah.
so, like, I think that gap is clear to see in this situation. But
Yeah.
one of the things I also think is the reaction reminds me that I don't think we can be too presumptuous in how these next 4 years are going to go. Like, I think that the ground is shifting, and people's willingness to see this guy as a hero isn't just because of how he looks or background or whatever, but it's because there's a legitimate anger and frustration with systems that people feel like are not working for them, and a sense of nihilism that I think is allowing people to accept things, even like violent acts.
Yeah.
And so all I think is that helped to get Donald Trump elected, in my opinion. But it also, to me, means it's a reason to be cautious about presuming how the next several years are going to go, because I really think the possibilities are fairly endless. I was telling someone, you can convince me Donald Trump will do and finish the sentence almost either anyway, and I don't think you can say I mean, you can convince me it's true. I'm like, the range, the floor and the ceiling the gap feels so big right now. And I think this shooting and the reaction to the shooting reminds me of that.
Yeah. I tell you what is working for us, and that is Astead Herndon doing some great journalism. I've kept you longer than I promised.
All good. We're fine.
Thank you, Astead, and I hope to see you soon and have the best of holidays. I am waiting to hear your Christmas visit.
Awesome. Thanks, Todd. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Astead Herndon, everyone. We so appreciate having him on. Man, that was fantastic to hear from him. He not only gave us a postmortem on the election, but also took us forward. Don't be presumptuous about what's going to happen in the next 4 years, and we will watch it all play out. We are thrilled to have you as one of our watchers. So thank you so much for tuning in. Make sure you hit the like button and the subscribe button as well. And that way you can be notified about all of our new content. There's plenty of it for you. We're live every day at 10 a.m. Eastern time. We drop more videos at 2 p.m. Eastern and at 5 p.m. And if you want even more Don Lemon Show content, we'd love for you to become a member of the Lemon Nation, of the Lemon community. Members receive access to special community posts, exclusive content, and live shows. So just head right over to our channel page or click the join button on this video. Again, thank you for watching, and we'll see you next time.